Ball pythons are the world's most popular pet snake, and with really good reason. They make awesome pets. So if you've been considering getting one, make sure you stay tuned because I'll be giving you guys everything you need to know on the husbandry and care of these amazing snakes. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you are new here, my name is Alex. I do videos on all things reptiles and amphibians. So if you're into that sort of stuff, please consider subscribing. But with that out of the way, let's get into the care guide. The first thing I want to talk about is the enclosure size. Now, ball pythons are not super big snakes, but they're also not, super small either. This girl is about 2 years old. Her name is Merlin. And she's not done growing just yet, so she's going to get a little bit bigger. As hatchlings, you can keep your ball pythons in something like a 20-gallon, and that'll probably be good for at least a few months. As adults, you want to upgrade them to something bigger. I would say the minimum should be something like a 4x2 by 1.5. So 4 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and at least 1.5 feet tall. I personally keep mine in a 4x2x2. And a lot of people think that you shouldn't give these snakes, room because they're not as active as other snakes. But in my experience and the experience of many other keepers, if you give them the opportunity to use, that extra space, they will use it. So that's definitely something you want to consider. And as far as a rack/tub system goes, I understand the need for it, especially if you're a breeder. But if you're just like a small-time hobbyist and you only have like, 1 or 2 snakes, then just, go crazy. Make them like a super cool vivarium, right? Like, why would you want to keep your snake in a tub where it's not going to have as much room? It's, going to be bored as hell, and you're not even going to be able to see your snake, right? Like, what are you even keeping a snake for? So that's just my philosophy. More is always better, and with a ball python, I think something like a 4x2 by 1.5 would be great. The next thing I want to talk about is the temperature and humidity. Like most reptiles, ball pythons are going to need a thermal gradient. You're going to want to keep the hot end between 85 and 88 degrees, the cool end between 75 and 80 degrees, and at night, temperatures between 70 to 75 are fine. As far as humidity goes, you're going to want to keep it between 50 and 65 to 70 degrees. If you keep it too low, they could have trouble shedding, which would then lead to other issues. And if you keep it too high, they're more susceptible to illnesses such as respiratory infections. The next thing I want to touch on is the substrate. There's 3 main options I would recommend. The first one being coconut husk. And coconut husk is basically just chopped chunks of coconut shell. And they do a really good job at absorbing water, so it's easy to maintain a high humidity when using this substrate, and it's also fairly resistant to mold and fungus. Another good option for substrate is Reptibark. That's what I have her and my corn snake on right now. And Reptibark is good. I just like how it looks more than coconut husk. The only issue with Reptibark is that it does mold very quickly if it gets wet. So you shouldn't wet it at all. If you're using a glass enclosure, then I would not recommend Reptibark, because it'll be very hard to get adequate humidity levels using that substrate. But since they are in a PVC enclosure, I'm able to use Reptibark and maintain good humidity. Lastly, I could also recommend a soil and sand mixture as substrate. That's currently what I have my California king snake currently on. It does absorb water, but not as well as coconut husk, and a lot better than Reptibark. So it's kind of somewhere in the middle. So you might want to be mindful of that. But this is also a good substrate that you can use if you're planning on going bioactive and adding plants and a cleanup crew of isopods and springtails. I also want to talk about decor and enrichment. So like most snakes, ball pythons need to feel secure. And one of the ways that you can help them feel secure is by giving them lots of places that they can hide. I would also recommend adding at least 1 hide on the cool end and 1 hide on the warmer end. You can also add things like fake plants, real plants, vines, leaf litter, etc. You're also going to want to make sure that you include a water bowl so that they can drink water.
No shit.
And you're going to want to make sure that if you're using tap water that you dechlorinate the water first and that you change out the water bowl at least every 3 to 4 days. Lastly, you're also going to want to give them things to climb on. Like I said, if you give them, enough room and things that they can to explore, they most likely will. And in Africa, they're actually frequently seen up in the trees, especially during the wet season. So they do display some arborealness in the wild, so I think it'd be a good idea to at least give them that chance in captivity. I also wanted to discuss lighting. Now, as far as lighting goes, your ball python is nocturnal, and like most reptiles, you're going to need a day and night cycle in order to function properly. And you can provide light in a variety of ways. Some heat sources will already have light. You can use LED lights, or you can also provide UVB. Now, as far as UVB goes, it's not absolutely necessary, but I would highly recommend it for a few reasons. There's been some studies that show that it can be beneficial in a few ways, including through better absorption of vitamins, increased immune health, and even a longer lifespan. And there's also been anecdotal evidence from other keepers that have said that after they started providing UVB, they found that their snake was more active. If you do choose to opt in for UVB, I would choose a low wattage UVB. It doesn't have to be super strong. And make sure that you only keep it on for 8 to 12 hours a day. Your snake will live longer if you feed it. So let's talk about their diet. Unfortunately, ball pythons are notoriously picky eaters. And in fact, that's the only reason that I wouldn't recommend them to a total beginner. They are known to go off of feed. And it typically does happen during the winter months, but it can also be completely random. And having a snake that just, stops eating is extremely stressful, and I just wouldn't want that for a new keeper. There are a lot of things you can try to get your snake to start eating again, but there's honestly so many factors to consider that it'll need its own video. So I'll probably be making that one soon as well. But as far as what they eat, they are carnivorous, so they're going to eat exclusively meat. In captivity, we typically feed them mice and rats. Rats are generally preferred because they are more nutritious, and that's what I feed her. I won't go into frozen thawed prey items versus live prey items. It would just take too long, but if you can, try to do frozen thawed. If not, live is also fine. I feed her live because she will not eat frozen thawed, so it's totally fine if you can't get your snake to eat frozen thawed. As far as prey item size goes, you're going to want to feed a rodent that's about as thick as the thickest part of your snake's body. So somewhere along the middle of their body, if the rodent is about that thick, it is good to go. If it's slightly thicker, that's fine as well. But if the rodent is a lot bigger than the thickest part of your snake, then it's probably too big for them. You're also going to want to make sure that you feed your snake at least every 5 to 7 days as a baby, about every 7 to 10 days as a juvenile, and as adults you can feed them every 2 to 3 weeks. You're also not going to want to feed them while they're in shed. They will probably not accept the food, so don't even bother feeding them while they're in shed. As far as their temperament goes, this is a snake that is not at all likely to bite you. Of course, they do have teeth and a mouth, so it is a possibility, but again, it's not likely at all. They don't mind being handled. They actually do pretty well with handling, and they do get big enough to the point where if you have a child or something, they can handle them without injuring the snake, and they're also not too big to where they're going to eat your child, so that's another plus. I wouldn't handle them more than three to 4 times a week, and for no more than about an hour at a time, just to avoid stressing them. You also do not want to handle them the day of feeding, because they will probably refuse the meal later on that day, and I wouldn't handle them for at least 2 to 3 days after you feed them to avoid possible regurgitation. You're also going to want to make sure that you do not handle them when they're in shed. When a snake sheds, their eyes kind of turn blue and they're basically blind at that point, so they're extremely stressed. Your snake probably won't bite you, but handling them will just make the shedding experience even more stressful for them. And lastly, this one's super important. Like, no matter what you do, do not handle your snake when you have the scent of rats in your hand. And I know that sounds like common sense, because it is, but if you're new to the hobby, accidents happen. She has actually bitten me one time, And this was like when I had just gotten her, maybe like 2 weeks after I got her. She bit me, and it was because I had just fed Meliodas, my corn snake, and I still had the scent of rat in my hands. So she struck at me. It was super scary. It didn't hurt that much, but it was still pretty traumatizing. It was my first ever snake bite. So yeah, just make sure you don't do that. That's the ball python care guide. I hope you guys found it insightful and informative. If you think there's something I missed, or if you have a question that I didn't answer, please let me know down in the comment section below. I would be happy to answer any of your questions. If you did enjoy the video, please like it. It helps the channel tremendously, and I'd really appreciate it. But yeah, that wraps up today's video. As always, thanks for watching, and enjoy your reptiles.